we often undervalue ourselves and we think that we're not able to do something or we're not capable of doing something. And I certainly felt that way going into the law. Like, what if someone like me can't be successful? Or what if I do have to go on guns blazing? But that's not the case. If you want to do something and you are really passionate about it, I think you can find a way to do it. If you want to go into the law and you've been told that you can't do it, there's no reason to think that you can't. And everyone is capable of pursuing it if they have a passion for it.
Hello and welcome to the Ambitious Woman of Color podcast. I'm your host, Jessica Lynn Rojas. This episode is part of our industry series where we break down what it actually takes for women of color to build and grow in high barrier careers where we're often underrepresented and underestimated. Today, we're talking about law, one of the most prestigious and demanding fields out there, and where women of color are still navigating being overlooked, overworked, and expected to prove themselves at every level. My guest is Moona Siddiqui, a managing immigration rights attorney who worked across private practice, government, and nonprofit law, and now leads a team of mostly young women of color. We're talking about what it really looks like to build a career in law as a woman of color, the pivots, the pressure, the imposter syndrome that doesn't just disappear, and what it takes to grow and lead in spaces that weren't built for you. If you're in a demanding career and trying to figure out how to move up without losing yourself in the process, this conversation is for you. Let's dive in. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. Today I have Moona here. Hi, Moona. How are you?
I'm good. Thank you for having me, Jessica.
I'm so excited to have you here, part of our industry series, so we can learn more about your journey as an immigration attorney and a woman of color in that space. Before we dive in, I like to start with our signature question. What's one thing that you refuse to sacrifice for your career?
I think mental health is one thing that I refuse to sacrifice for my career. I think the field that I come from is one where people really, really care about what they do and tend to give more of themselves than they should. So I think it's really, really important to remember that you have to help yourself before you can help others.
Yeah, that's so important, especially like you said in the field you're in, or just when you're in a mission driven organization or work, public service, you want to do everything and you want, especially,
Mhm.
you have people's lives in your hands and their future. So you want to like put in all the work. But like you said, if you're not helping yourself first, then you're not really able to like give them the best version of you if you're exhausted or if you're depleted or if your health is suffering from it. So definitely it's a good non-negotiable. So before we like dive into your career path, like I would like for you to have some space to introduce yourself for our listeners to get to know you.
Yeah, sure. So, hello, everybody. For those who are listening, my name is Mona, like Jessica mentioned. I'm an immigration attorney. I've been practicing for, I think, about 11 years at this point in immigration law. And mostly I've come from the private space world and recently transitioned into nonprofit work and focusing on trying to give back to the community in that way.
Perfect. So like you said, you worked in private practice and government, nonprofit law, and your path obviously isn't linear. And I think especially for a career like law, people have this preconception that it has to look a certain way. But you
Mhm.
actually shared that before you went into immigration law, you had been working towards environmental law. So I just want like our listeners just to learn a little bit more about your journey and like even though you always knew you wanted to go into law, just how even within that you had different pivots and different changes and
Mhm.
you found your path.
Yeah, so definitely I started out, like just mentioned, in environmental law, and that was kind of the focus from high school onwards, majored in environmental science, went to a law school focused in environmental law, got my environmental law certificate, and that was always the plan. And I think for me, especially as someone who feels the need to plan out everything, and have everything like really organized in that sense, it was helpful for me and also important for me to try to be a little bit flexible, especially in this area when you're deciding what to do with the rest of your life. I think oftentimes we feel like we have to do certain things, but I think it's important to remember that life is so short and you don't want to try to force yourself into a box or a space that really doesn't, mesh with you and who you are as a person. So as much as I did enjoy environmental, I think for me, it just felt like, the reason I went into the law was to help people. And I'm sure it was helping people like down the road, but it kind of just
Hmm.
felt like, what I'm seeing and the results of my work are so far off, that it's difficult to really feel fulfilled from that. At least for me, it was. So the pivot to immigration law was really helpful for me because then I'm actually working directly with community members, directly with people, and you can really see the effect of the work that you're doing in their day to day lives. So I think that was helpful. And like I mentioned, I think it's really important to be flexible and try to feel your way into things rather than feel pressured to go any which way, even if that means something like you deciding law school isn't for you, which did happen to a lot of people in my law
Yes,
school
me.
class. Yeah, it's
Well, I
definitely
mean,
not for everybody.
I didn't even go as far as law school. I was like pre-law undergrad. And then I had like a crisis junior year where I was like, I've been thinking that law is what I wanted to do. And the more I was diving
Mhm.
into the work, because I studied political science and then I studied like constitutional law, as like a concentration. And then I'm like, I don't want to do this.
Exactly, and that's so important to recognize. I think people sometimes feel like, "I started doing this, and I have to do it all the way. This has to be, the end goal. This has to be the rest of my life." And that's not true, that's not the case. No, and you definitely don't
Yeah.
wanna do those law school debts and those law school loans if you don't have to. So there's that.
Yeah, definitely. That's why I was like, what if like I, study for the LSAT and I'm like, what if I don't even get into law school? And then I'm like, what if I get into law school and I hate it and I went through all of
Mhm.
this for nothing?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So for you, like being in different like sectors within law, how would you describe those environments? Because I feel like people underestimate the difference between how the environment feels, especially for women of color,
Mm.
like when you are navigating in all of those areas. Because I see, a lot of like clients, they're optimizing for the wrong thing, like the title or prestige without understanding like what that looks like on a day to day, maybe thinking like, "Oh, I want to go into corporate law because I want to make money," or, maybe other areas within law where you're thinking, I want to grow, I want to make a lot of money, but then maybe you don't realize just like the difference, even within law in all of those different like concentrations or sectors or areas.
Yeah, so that's an important distinction to be aware of, and sometimes it's difficult to really understand it until you're doing it or you talk to somebody in it or you maybe shadow somebody who's doing that sort of thing. And for me, I've been doing a little bit of environmental law, but mostly immigration law, which is, public interest field of law. But I have practiced it in both the private context and then in the nonprofit context. In environmental law, I did kind of government work. And there's pros and cons to each of these. Like government work, the one of the biggest pros is the stability that comes with it, the benefits that come with a government sort of job and salary. So the stability of it is nice. You know that, this is the pay scale, these are the benefits, and then if I retire in this job, I have these ongoing benefits. And that's a big reason a lot of people choose to go into that. Another thing to note for people who are considering law school is that you do have loan forgiveness for public interest fields of law. If you do like a
Mm-hmm.
government job or like a nonprofit job, then you have like a loan forgiveness program. You do have to do those jobs for 10 years for the loan forgiveness program to apply, but a lot of people choose it for that reason. I think the con for me with government job, especially in environmental law, was really that there's so much bureaucracy, there's so much red tape associated with a government sort of job
Mm-hmm.
and being a government worker. It kind of feels like, you have a lot of limitations being placed on you as a result of that. And then also there's a piece of it with environmental law for me where it felt like, okay, like I'm sure there is some impact that's resulting from this, like 10 years down the road, maybe, but it didn't feel quite as fulfilling as I thought it would be for me to be in that sort
Mm-hmm.
of role. And I felt like I was being hampered. So I think that's one thing I really didn't like about it. And that's one thing I really did like about the private law space, where if I retained a client, I could kind of go as far as I wanted with this person's case. If they had a situation where their application was denied, I could then take it to the appellate courts. And if that wasn't successful, I could go all the way to the Ninth Circuit Court. So I was able to do some really interesting cases and do like
Mm-hmm.
Ninth Circuit appeals and cases, which was really important for me as a learning experience and just really, really interesting to me as well. And the challenge of it, I really, really enjoyed. And then for private spaces, I would say the con is having to charge people. I think for me, as somebody who's going into this space because I really, really care and I want to help my clients and help the community members that are suffering from these issues, I think it was hard to tell somebody, okay, now you owe me like $5,000. and I can't help you if you're not going to pay me. And it's difficult to say that to somebody who you know is in a desperate circumstance. And I think for me, that's like one of the biggest cons is having to charge people and have conversations about money with people who you're like, I'm not here really for the money, but I still have to pay the bills.
Yeah, yeah. And actually that is a very common thing among women of color especially. Yes, among women, but I think for women of color, especially if your parents like immigrated to this country and, maybe, at the beginning there was like challenges around that and what you grow up hearing around money, that really impacts like the way that you view money. So that is very common, especially when you're doing mission driven work, when you're helping people and the reason your career path is the helping people, but like you said, you have to pay your bills and you have to charge, and it's part of the hard work you're putting at the same time. So it's not like you're just charging a lot. And I mean, I guess like also for private practice, like that money isn't all going to you, but you're still like putting your time and energy and effort. And like you said, like the difference in private practice, like you were able to go above and beyond. So like, at least for you, like you can feel, yeah, yes, I was charging, a large fee, but you were doing everything and anything that you could to make sure that you got the best results for your clients. So at least that can help you feel a little bit better about the charging them a lot.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. I think that that is, like you mentioned, one of the benefits of it is that you can put in more into each individual case because you have the time and the ability to do that versus like nonprofit space where I currently am because we're so grant dependent. It's really about trying to do as many cases as possible because that's how we're going to get the money. When we file a case,
Mhm.
we file a deliverable, then we get the money. And so because of that, we're like, no, we have to get cases filed, and like we can't take these really complex cases because they're going to take more time and more effort, more energy, more resources that we oftentimes don't have. And then how are we going to get our grants if we're not filing deliverables? So I think that's the
Yeah.
con of nonprofit work. But the pro is that, I don't have to charge anybody for anything. And a lot of times people have consultations with me and they tell me, like, I have never been able to talk to an attorney before because private attorneys charge 250 or 350 for a consultation. I can't afford a
Mhm.
consultation fee. So we offer free consultations, and I did provide like a intake link. So if anybody
Okay.
listening wants a consultation with an immigration attorney, feel free to fill out that link, and our consultations are all free. And so are our services if that becomes necessary. But I think that's one of the pros of nonprofit work is that you're really just focused on doing the work and
Yeah.
doing the case and not having to worry about, did you pay me my consultation fee or did you pay me?
Yeah. But then that, like you said, is like a double-edged sword because you
Mhm.
are like now you have to get the most cases, which means that you
Yeah.
don't have the time and capacity and resources to be able to like you said, take complex cases, which those people also deserve to have a presentation. But if they can
Mhm.
afford it, then it's unfortunate because maybe because it's so complex, they're more in need than somebody with like an easier path. So I guess like that's what you said. It's like that's what you have to sacrifice in order to be able to provide free services and, kind of like limit the time and energy and resources that you give into each client.
Yeah, yeah. It is a little bit of a double-edged sword, but, everything has its pros and cons.
Yeah, and as far as navigating law as a woman of color in these fields, and I know you mentioned that for private practice, a lot of those are male dominant and predominantly white at the top. Like, how has that impacted you and beyond just representation, but how has your work been seen? How you've been evaluated? How do you feel like you had to prove yourself in that career? And like, what did it look like?
Yeah, yeah. I think even if you have the best boss you could possibly have, I think it's just innate in us as women in general, but especially, exponentially for women of color to feel the need to prove themselves because I think historically we have been it's kind of expected that maybe we won't, arise to a certain level. And I remember an occasion in high school when I had said I wanted to be a lawyer, where one of my teachers had kind of laughed and they're like, "You're going to be a lawyer." Okay. So it definitely does
Wow.
happen. Yeah. And he was in fact a white male, but it was crazy to have that coming from like a teacher in particular. So I think early on, it was kind of ingrained in me, that people don't necessarily expect that much. Or they might see, me being relatively petite, looking a
Mm-hmm.
certain way, sounding a certain way, and they're like, that person's going to be a lawyer. Like, okay, I don't see that happening. But I think a lot of it also has to do with stereotypes associated with the law as well.
Mm-hmm.
People think you have to be a certain way or advocate a certain way to be a successful lawyer. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's one thing I learned early on is that a lot of my white male bosses or people ahead of me in the legal field who, were my mentors essentially, because that was mostly who I was around was other white men.
Mm-hmm.
They would tell me, like, this is how you do it. You go in when you have an ICE appointment, you go in and you go like this, you go guns blazing, and that's how you get a successful result. And for me, I think I really had to learn what is the best lawyering like maneuver for me? What is the best
Mm-hmm.
lawyering strategy for me? How can I advocate the best for my clients? And it's much different than a white male would do it. Like
Yes.
I can't go in guns blazing. People are not going to want to work with me if I'm going in like that. I'm not allowed to go in guns blazing.
Yes.
A
As a
white
woman
male
of
can.
color, yes. Yeah, because you're threatening if you go in guns blazing, like literally.
Yeah, exactly. So people are going to be like, this girl's like terrible. I don't want to help her. I don't want to work with her. Whereas like men are allowed to do that. And they're seen as like, this guy's just like a tough boss and stuff. So I had to learn early on, like, what is the best lawyering strategy for me? How can I be the best advocate possible? And it's not that way. And I think every woman is going to figure that out for themselves, like
Mhm.
how to do it best. And oftentimes it comes down to using things that are historically used against us as women in our favor. Like you might be seen as like helpless or small, and sometimes I have to use that in my favor and advocate for my
Yeah.
clients in that way. So it's an interesting thing to experience that and see other people telling you to do things a certain way, and you're like, that works for you, that doesn't work for me. And there's like no one size fits all,
Yeah.
basically,
Yeah.
is what I'm saying. Yeah.
That you mentioned that because like you said, we could get career advice. And this is like exactly kind of like the work that I do is like we get all this career advice and you're told, oh, this is how you need to approach this. This is how you need to negotiate this. This is how, you need to move forward in order if you want to grow. But what work for a white man or even a white woman is not going to work for a woman of color. And again, it's like has nothing to do with you as a person. It has to do with the perception. It has to do with like how you're coming across and how you're positioning. So like for you to leverage who you are and like you said sometimes you could use that to your advantage, but like finding the approach and the positioning that works for you and where you still get to take care of yourself because if you're showing up and trying to approach it like you said like your lowering approach if you try to do that the way someone else did is not genuine first of all because it's not who you are.
Mhm.
So then you're not going to be confident and feel like you are, being the best lawyer you can be when you're pretending to be somebody else or trying to use somebody else's approach, which is not your natural like way. Versus, like you said, I feel like, you can find like what is like the best approach that is going to be matching with your personality, with who you are. Well, obviously using like everything the legal way and using law to your advantage of what you could do. But then the approach would be that you want to take is the one that is going to be more natural to you, where you feel confident and you feel better, and that you're just going to have a better outcome because you're being more of who you are instead of what others are telling you to be, because that may work for them, but it's not working for you. And that's what I always talk about. Like you said it too. There's no one size fits all. Something that might work for me might not be the same thing that works for you. So it's trusting that you're going to find the right approach that's going to be the best for you. And then, I feel like a lot of it is like going towards self trust and then believing in yourself and doing the best that you can so you can help your client, like in that situation.
Yeah, and I think that's a really, really important thing for women to learn as well. And I think we're often taught to not trust our instinct and not trust our intuition, even for things not relevant to the legal space, like choosing who to date or who to become in a enter a partnership with. Like we're told, like, oh, like that's a shallow like thing. Like don't
Hmm.
don't be so shallow or something. But really, sometimes it's just our intuition telling us this isn't right for me. This makes me feel unsafe and I don't want to do this or I don't want to be like this. And really learning how to trust that. And I think people can often tell also. I think people are more intuitive than we give them credit for most of the time. And people can tell when you're not genuine. And when you're
Mm-hmm.
not genuine, you don't have confidence. And to be a successful advocate, you really need to feel into that confidence in order to really, really do it well. And it can
Yeah.
take a lot of practice and effort, but it's important.
Yeah, yeah, especially like you said in that field, because if, you're not confident in what you're doing, either the court or, the judge, they're not going to, I mean, if you're taking it to court or just in general, they're not going to like take you seriously. They're going to be like, oh, she doesn't know what she's doing or use that against you. And that's like a
Mhm.
disservice to your client. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's definitely true. Yeah, I think there is often a misconception that the law is about arguing, but really I think it's about, about persuading.
Yeah.
So you really have to be
Negotiating.
negotiating, exactly. So you really have to understand people to a sense to do it well and understand how people perceive you. So it's definitely a field that's a lot about perception and appearances. And so learning that about yourself, how you're perceived, how you come across, it can become really important.
And when you started navigating, like, okay, now I have clients and I'm representing them, what were some of the things that you felt, maybe some thoughts or even insecurities or anything that you had? Obviously, when you're like a fresh new lawyer and just kind of the things that you encounter, and how did you like help yourself to improve, to be more confident, to really trust yourself?
Yeah. Yeah. I think as cliche it is, I think practice does make perfect, sometimes. So I think a lot of it is just getting used to it. And the more you do it, then the more you get comfortable with it and you just learn to trust your instincts and your intuition. But I think early on, especially as like a young female lawyer, I think oftentimes I would have clients who don't take me seriously.
I mean,
And
because you even
so
like right now, you look so young. So I could imagine like 10 years ago what you look like.
looked even younger. So yeah, I've always tended to look a little bit younger for my age, and I think I have like a voice that sounds a little bit like young, youthful. Oftentimes clients weren't like taking me seriously, or they would do something like hit on me or like something weird, be a little creepy,
Mm.
and really having to um, be a little bit tough. So I tell people like I have a work persona and a work voice that's very different from my like personal life persona and personal life voice. And I didn't actually realize this until my mom told me while she heard me on a work call. She's like, your voice gets deeper. It goes like 2 octaves down when you're prepping somebody for court or you're like on a consultation. And it's funny how that happens, like naturally. In an effort to want to be taken seriously, you lower your voice and like the register so that you're taken seriously. And a lot of times
Yeah.
it's just about being a little bit nose nonsense at work, and you really have to figure out when a client needs a soft touch and when a client needs a little bit of toughness.
Hmm.
Some clients need the toughness, even though they're also in difficult situations. Sometimes you just have to go in and just be like, like, sir, do you want to be like you're here for a court case? Do you want to be deported or you want to stay in the country? Like, what are we doing here? So I think it's about learning when to pull which lever.
Yeah.
And figuring that out. And oftentimes especially I think in public interest fields of law, you think that you have to be soft and gentle all the time with your clients. But sometimes your clients need a little bit of tough love and like a come to
Yeah.
Jesus moment, So I have to have that a lot.
Yeah.
And it's been interesting for me as somebody who's generally perceived a certain way to be like, have clients kind of say, like, she's so harsh, she's so strict. And I've never been told that before.
I'm like,
So
you're
it's
to
like,
me, like on a personal level, you're like probably one of the sweetest people I know. And like,
yeah.
I'm like, she's
Yeah,
so nice. She's so sweet. And then they're like,
yeah,
she's so
yeah.
strict.
Clients, a lot of my male clients do not think so. But I think that's for their own benefit, really, for your benefit,
Yes.
but also for theirs, like in court. And it's like I always tell them, like, do you think the government attorney is going to be easy on you in court, or do you think they're going to ask you these tough questions that I'm asking you? This is for your own best interest, and I'm doing this is because you need to be prepared for an adversarial environment where you're going to be asked these questions and probably even worse. So,
Yeah.
and learning how to do that is, yeah, important.
And like it sounds like for your field, especially like in immigration law, you have to wear multiple hats besides like the legal one because it's like what I'm hearing right now is I'm hearing you're a social worker, you're a therapist, you're, a boss, you're a lawyer, like all of these different like roles that you have to play in order to be able to advocate for your client and help them. And like you said, if it requires like a harsher touch versus a softer touch, like it is like very interpersonal relationships and understanding like, okay, this person, what is going to be more effective to help them? Like, what approach do I need to take to help them? Because like, you were mentioning like for your male clients, like you have to be a little bit more harsh. And maybe a lot of it is like for them to take you seriously, but also respect you. And so it sounds like you have to take different approaches with different clients and depending on the case and everything. So it's not just like, okay, I'm just going to go and like handle every case the same way and handle every client the same way.
Yeah, definitely. That's true. And that's where like learning trust your instincts really comes into play. And the more you meet with clients, the more you get a sense of like this client needs a little bit of toughness and this client needs like a little bit of gentleness. Um, but yeah, I think that's very, very true what you mentioned about immigration lawyers in particular wearing so many different hats. And that's where I also have to learn how to set boundaries appropriately with clients, in the sense that you have a lot of these traumatized community members and you're working with them so closely and you have to build a rapport with them. Because to properly advocate for them, you need to build
Hmm.
trust with them. And you can't really do that without that. So, learning how to build trust with them so you can effectively advocate for them, but then also reminding them, but like, hey, I'm your advocate. Like, I'm not your friend. I'm not
Hmm.
um, your sister or your family member or something like that. I'm your lawyer, and I'm also not your therapist.
Yeah.
So it can be a little difficult. And I think there's a component of our field that is, a little bit of social work, a little bit of therapy, but also like learning when to draw the boundary and say, like, this is something that I cannot delve into. You need to
Hmm.
go find help elsewhere. And I had a situation like that come up, I think, a few weeks ago where I had a client who is very, very traumatized, and she's experienced a lot of domestic violence in her life, and some really horrible situations. And she's kind of, I guess, developed a bond with me.
Hmm.
And she wants the relationship to be more than just a lawyer client relationship in the sense that she wants to be able to call me and like
Hmm.
just tell me about what's going on in her life. And I have to keep telling her, like, I'm your lawyer, I'm not your friend. And then I think she had said to me at one point, I don't need you to be my lawyer. I need you to be my friend. I said, well, I can't be your friend. I'm not your
Yeah.
friend. I'm your lawyer. And I had to stop her and say, like, it sounds like you need to speak with somebody who's a licensed mental health professional. I cannot offer that for you. It's not in your interest for me to do that. It's not my field, and I won't be able to successfully help you in that. You need to go seek help elsewhere. And really firmly drawing those boundaries, but in a way that's also kind and
Yeah.
cognizant of the experiences she's gone through. So that was a little difficult experience. And I know for my paralegal, especially, he was so stressed about it. He's like, what do we do? But yeah, I think it's a little bit of trusting your gut, trusting your instinct, and also standing firm with your boundaries at the same time.
Yeah. So it sounds like immigration law, just in general, is high stakes and very human centered.
Mhm.
And like you're literally carrying people's future and their family and stability in these cases. So, how do you hold that responsibility while also protecting yourself? Like, because the trauma and the things that they're experiencing is also impacting you. And how do you protect yourself in that way, too?
Yeah, so that's a good thing to be aware of as well. There's a lot of vicarious trauma associated with this field in particular. Just hearing stories and experiencing other people's trauma and having to hold that and be professional about it when it happens, I think can cause a lot of residual and vicarious trauma to you. And that's something I talk a lot about in at my workspace as the managing attorney at our office. I have a lot of people working under me, and that's something I talk a lot with them, and having good coping mechanisms as well and good outlets, and also properly, sticking to your boundaries.
Hmm.
People who go into this work, there's really no reason to go into it work other than you really want to help people. You really care about your clients and your community. You don't go into it for the money. You don't make a lot of money in this field. People listening, don't go into immigration law if you want to make a bunch of money. But yeah, it's for people who really, really care about the mission, really, really care about the
Yeah.
clients. And I think when that's the place you're coming from, you tend to go a little too much above and beyond. And you
Mm-hmm.
feel like I have to focus on this other person or on this community at the expense of myself. Or you feel like you have to let people cross boundaries because they've been through so many things in their life. Like I have to accept that or I have to be patient with that. And I think I have to often remind my staff, you don't have to do that. People can't just yell at you just because they've been traumatized. Like
Yeah.
sure they've been through experiences that doesn't entitle them to treat you like that, and that's not okay. And so I always tell them, like, if somebody's verbally abusing you, they don't need to be a client of ours. Make a note of that in your client profile, and if you feel like you can't have that conversation, sometimes I offer to step in, but oftentimes it's something you have to learn to do as well. If you're going to go into this space, learn how to properly stick to your boundaries with firmness and tell people, like, you cannot speak like this to me, or you cannot treat me this way if you want to continue to be a client of mine. And that's not okay. And also telling them, like, like this other client that I mentioned, we are not friends. We don't have a
Mm-hmm.
personal relationship. This is a professional lawyer client relationship or a professional paralegal client relationship, and sticking firmly to that, and making sure people are aware of your boundaries. Another thing is to I have them set their work lines 9 to 5. That's the only time people can contact me, and put do not disturb on outside of that. Because a lot of times people feel like I have to be available to answer calls. If somebody's calling me outside of work hours, I still have to answer this call because the field we're in, you're like, what if somebody really needs help? And I have to tell them, like, they might, but I think it's difficult to feel this way. And it's difficult to implement it, to say like somebody might need my help, but right now I need to
Mm-hmm.
focus on myself. It can be hard, and it doesn't feel good all the time doing it. Like I don't feel good
Yeah.
saying it, but but
But
it's the
that's what you
truth,
have
I
to
think.
do. Yeah, like what you have to do to take care of yourself, right? So you mentioned you're a managing attorney, and that means like you lead all of the office, right? Like
All the
you're
legal
like the
staff in
lead
my
attorney
department, yeah.
for, yes. Yeah. So that's a pretty like big accomplishment. Like how did you navigate that? And like what was your experience to now like be leading all the like legal work there?
Yeah, so I think for me, a lot of it has been reflecting on the bosses I've had, and I've had some really, really bad ones. So I think reflecting on like what it was like to work in those environments, and
Mhm.
things that my former employers or bosses did, that I was like, this was terrible. I don't want anybody to ever experience this or go through it. And also what I would have done differently in those moments. And I think being able to manage my own department, my own legal staff, I've been able to be more aware of that and be able to implement all of those things. Like I tend to try to facilitate a workspace that's really, really open to critique and open to feedback. And so it's been great for me to be able to see my team and my staff be able to really be upfront and candid with me about what's working
Mhm.
and what's not working in our internal policies. What do we need to change to make these policies or these internal procedures work for the team? Because if it's not working for the team, it doesn't work. Right.
Yeah.
So that's, I think, really important if you're going to be managing people or managing a team, is to be aware of that. Like you might think a policy is a great policy. You might think this is the procedure and this is how to do things. But if it's not working for the people who are working for you, then it doesn't work.
Yeah.
So, yeah, so that's been really important. I think I've been in workspaces where I was told like this is the procedure and this is what you have to do, and I say like that doesn't work though. It doesn't work for me, it doesn't work for the clients, and so I
Mhm.
don't want to do that. But I've been told like, well, you're not a team player if you're not going to follow procedure. But I think being a team player is also about being able to be candid and honest with the rest of your team and your supervisor about what's really not working. And
Mhm.
so I tried to foster an environment where everybody is really free to be open, and also an environment where there's no hierarchy. And I think that's an experience that I've also seen in legal spaces as well, where people feel like if they're a senior attorney, or if they're like an attorney at all, then they're above like the paralegal or the admin assistant. I think it's really, really important for me that everybody be aware of the fact that like there's no hierarchy here. Just because you're a
Yeah.
senior attorney or because you're an attorney doesn't mean that you're above anybody else. The paralegals know so much that we as attorneys don't know, and admin assistants as well know so much that we as attorneys don't know. And so it's ridiculous to think that, that they don't have a role to play or they don't have input to offer, especially because nobody can know everything. I mean, I'm a
Yeah.
managing attorney and there's so much that I don't know that I'm going to other people. I'm like, how do we do this? So I think it's really, really important to be aware of that. And that's how you can really make sure that you're the most well-rounded as an
Mm-hmm.
advocate, as a practitioner, and also how your workspace is going to be the most effective, I think.
Yeah, I love that you mentioned that you are reflecting on what are the things that you experienced that didn't work or that didn't help you grow as an attorney and shaping your office to be different than that, to give everyone opportunity to feel like they are part and they're valuable and that they bring a different skill set that not everybody has. So it's more collaborative and less hierarchy. So I love that. And I know you've mentioned that you manage a team that's mostly women of color. How have you navigated that? Because you're not only navigating, the legal space, but you're also shaping how they experience it. So how do you intentionally support them so they can grow and be able to one day be also managing attorneys or for
Yeah.
paralegals to rise in their career as well?
Yeah, I think that's something in particular that I really love about what I do. And that's been really important to me, especially as someone who came up in a time, or my experiences particularly were where I was being led by white males, or my bosses were mostly white males. So I think it's been helpful for me to support them in kind of the ways that I've discussed on this podcast here today, like letting them know, like, the way I lawyer might not be the way that you want to lawyer or that works for
Mm-hmm.
you, or the way I have advocate for people may not be the way that you successfully advocate for people,
Mm-hmm.
and letting them know that, and also enabling them to trust their gut about their cases and about their clients as well. There's a piece of it that's about legal knowledge, but that's not everything. You can be you can know everything about the legal space or about a case, but that's not going to be sufficient to help you be a good advocate. It's
Mm-hmm.
about so much more than just knowing the law. And so a lot of it, like I mentioned, comes down to trusting your instinct about a case or about a client. And so I tell all my lawyers and my paralegals, as a lawyer, when you retain a case or you have a consultation, you decide to retain a case, I want you to take ownership of this case. I'm still here to offer support. The other attorneys are here to offer support if you need somebody to bounce ideas off of, but really you should be taking ownership of this case. The decision needs to be made about how to navigate that case. Ultimately, that should come down to you and the client, and you need to trust your gut about what is best for this client in this situation. And sure, go to other people, ask for opinions, ask for advice, but trust your gut as an advocate. You've worked with this person, we haven't. You know what the case is like more than we do. So being able to trust that. And I think it's been so great for me to watch the attorneys that worked under me develop and grow and see them become more confident. And I just had performance evaluations a few months ago with my staff. And I think it's something I talked with one of my new attorneys about. I think she has maybe a year or two of practice. So she's a little bit new to this space. And I told her,
Mm-hmm.
like, you've already in the past 6 months, you've already grown so much in terms of just being confident and how you're choosing to navigate a case and how you're choosing to work up a case. And it's been so great to see. And I think one of my first lawyers I hired many years ago, she just recently started her own little solo. And it's been so great. I see her in all my listservs, and I'm like, makes me feel so proud to see her as a young Mexican American woman be so successful in her field. And I think it's another avenue that's been so rewarding in this field and helping them be aware of that. And I know one of them had mentioned in our performance evaluations that most of her supervisors have also been white, whether white women or white men. And so it was helpful for her to have somebody manage her who is a woman of color, who has those same experiences. I think people underestimate how important it is to have a welcoming environment,
Yeah.
a diverse environment as well, where you're kind of free to bring up those concerns or the ways those things intersect with the work.
Yeah. So for other people listening that maybe if they're in the legal field and, they don't have a mentor or a manager like you, like what are some unspoken rules that they should understand if they want to move up in their career?
I Yeah, I think it's gonna be something I've repeated a lot through this podcast, but I think it's really, really important to stick to your boundaries and be firm with them. And people might be uncomfortable about it. You might be uncomfortable saying it, but I think it's still really important to say it. And that's something I learned early on. Like, a manager might assign you a case, and you might think, like, that's not how this case should be handled. I had a case assigned to me that was like an asylum case, and I felt this person has no business applying for asylum. Another attorney might choose to take it, but you might think, like, this is not what's best for the client. This is not what's best for me. Really sticking to that and being firm with that, even when it feels uncomfortable, even when it feels not good to do. I think that's what's going to help you get farther in the end. I think that's one thing, especially as women of color or people of color, really. 'Cause it's not just, I think, even specific to women when it comes to that, is it's just being firm with people and letting them know, like, this is a hard line for me. I won't be doing this. And I think that's going to get you much farther than you think. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Mona, like for being honest and really helping us understand like what it really takes to build a career in law as a woman of color. So before we wrap up, one final question. What's one thing that you want every woman of color listening to take away from this episode?
Well, I hope that they all take away the fact that, they are much more capable than they think they are. I think we often undervalue ourselves and we think that we're not able to do something or we're not capable of doing something. And I certainly felt that way going into the law. Like, what if someone like me can't be a successful lawyer? What if I do have to go on guns blazing? But that's not the case. If you want to do something and you are really passionate about it, I think you can find a way to do it. And so I hope that everyone listening, if you want to go into the law and you've been told that you can't do it, there's no reason to think that you can't. And everyone is capable of pursuing it if they have a passion for it. And yeah, I hope that people trust themselves and trust their abilities.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this, Mona.
Of course. Thank you for having me.
Career Baddies, this is part of our industry series. And if you're a woman of color in law or any field like it, where the path to the next level is pretty controlled and the people making those decisions don't usually look like you, I want you to hear this differently. Being good at your job is not what gets you promoted. A lot of you are already doing the work to the next level. You're managing clients, keeping things moving, the person people go to when something gets complicated or starts to fall apart. But when your name comes up, it's not being talked about it like that. It sounds more like, she's reliable, she's solid, she's great to have on the team. And someone else is being talked about as the one who leads, owns the client, who's ready for more. That's the gap. So if we're working together, that's where we start. We look at the work you're already doing and make sure it's actually being tied to results, to clients, to decisions, in a way that people can't separate you from it. Then we get clear on your path forward. Who actually has influence over your promotions? What do they need to see from you? And where you're spending your time on things that make you look helpful, but don't actually move you up. So you're not just working hard and hoping to get noticed, you're being intentional on how you're showing up and who's seeing it. And then we work on those moments you already know matter. When you're in a room with senior people and you hold back, or you soften your point, or you walk out thinking you should have said something differently. So next time you don't hesitate. You say it, it's clear, and people actually take it as leadership. That's how you stop being the one everyone relies on and start being the one they move up. If this is what you want, to be seen, paid, and moved into the next role you're already operating in, you could DM me on Instagram at Jessica Lynn Rojas or book a consult at jessicalynn-rojas.com/scheduling, and we'll look at what needs to shift. And if you want more support like this on your inbox, join Dear Ambitious Woman of Color. The link is in the show notes. Take care of yourself, career baddies. Vamonos.